I am Sharyn Craig, and all your faces, I believe, are familiar, whether it's here at Cozy or from Adult Ed, all those years ago, or, just walking through the store, or just what it is. And I am delighted that you were willing to give up a little bit of your Saturday to be here today and, kind of get a little pep talk about the Building Blocks program. Just as a little bit of background, maybe for somebody that hasn't been participating in the Building Blocks, this is our 3rd year. And we started phase 1 3 years ago, obviously. And in phase 1, all the blocks were 9 patches. Remember what I said just a couple minutes ago, similar grids or the same grid. So I made the executive decision that ours would all be the same grid for this particular Building Blocks program. So phase 1, we released 1 block a month, either as the pattern or as a kit. So you could buy just the pattern alone or the pattern with 3 fat-eighths of fabric. And there was a colorway that you could choose, 4 or 5 different colorways. I think it was 5 the first year, if I remember it correctly. And so people came in and were very excited, but there is something that happens when a program spends itself over a year. That's somewhere about the middle of the year. If you haven't been keeping up and getting every block made every month, pretty soon you've got this stack of either just patterns or patterns with fabric, but they haven't gotten made into a block. So I had told Danielle when we started this, we need to have a mid-year pep rally, kind of get people excited again. So 3 years ago, we started this pep rally thing. I think we actually on the first year did it on Memorial Day and it was standing room only in here for the people coming, either to get inspired and, to see how many blocks you had made. And I think it's an incentive for you to get your blocks made, because at that point, you're coming in and you know that we're going to ask you how many blocks you've got. So, there's a reason to get them done. Unfortunately, too many quilters don't feel that a good enough reason is just because I want to do it. That's always my favorite reason, is just because I want to do it. When I first got into quilting and was making quilts, my husband would say after X number of quilts down the road, "What are you making this one for?" Because it's like, how many quilts does any one person need? Well, I need more than the average person, I guess, because I don't need a reason. But I would manufacture them for George. I would tell him, my wall is cold, so I've got to make one for the wall. Oh, you see that door? There's nothing hanging on that door over there, so we got to drape one over the door. There's a basket that doesn't have anything popping out of it, so we're going to pop it out of there. After a while, he stopped asking because he knew that it wasn't going to do him any good anyway. All right, so phase 1, 9 patches, 1 block a month, released with either of the pattern or the fabric. Phase 2 comes along in the next year, and what we moved to was 4 patches. That means that the square that you're making has 4 equal divisions across it. Now, because I don't like 12-inch blocks, we're not making 12-inch blocks. I decided we were going to make 9-inch blocks. And, why 9? That sounds like a really odd size, doesn't it? Well, do you know that 6, 9, and 12 are the 3 of the only sizes that easily divide into nice quilter numbers for both the 9 patch and the 4 patch. So that's where the 9-inch came from. I'd love 6 inches, but I know a lot of you, if it can't be a bed-sized quilt, there is something lost in translation there. So if we go to 9 inches, I know because of the setting, we're going to be making a large quilt. No matter if you only have 12 blocks, it's going to be a large quilt. No matter that they're only 9 inches, it's going to be a large quilt. I have trouble today making small quilts. I kind of would like to occasionally, but because I get so excited about the setting and what I'm going to do to put them together, they just kind of grow like Topsy, my mother always said, They just evolve into something bigger. In the first year, we gave you both template-free numbers and pattern pieces. I, Sharyn Craig, happen to be more a fan of templates. And I would show you in the beginning how you could make your own templates that were rotary friendly. Well, pretty soon we started getting little kind of whisperings in our ear, couldn't you please make the templates for us? So God bless Daniela, who did all the legwork and found somebody willing to make the templates so that she can sell them, we can buy them, and those that want to use templates have that as an option. But every single number for every single block has nice template-free numbers. If that's what you choose to do, nobody has to use templates. One of the things about making a single block and working with small pieces of fabric, it doesn't always lend itself to the strip stuff that we may be used to making quilts, where you cut a whole strip and are using the whole strip. You may only want 1 square out of that piece of fabric. And yes, your rulers can cut those, but sometimes you have to cut more than you actually need for your block. Whereas when you are working with a template, that doesn't happen. You can cut exactly how many you need. So we had lessons on how to use templates, on how to keep them from slipping on your fabric. whether it's to use the Steady Betty strips on the back or double stick tape or the 404 spray. We talked about lots of different ways because that was a complaint. You know, there's no perfect solution. But it's the same problem that many of you have with your rulers. You put your ruler down to cut a 2-inch strip or a 2.5-inch strip and it moves on you. So all these things I've talked about to keep the templates from moving, you can also use on your rulers to keep them from moving. And if that's a problem that you're experiencing, you may want to investigate one of those solutions. So phase 2 comes along. Now we're at 4 patches. It has 7 new pattern pieces. It's not the same pattern pieces that we used for phase 1. We had 7 pattern pieces that would make 9-inch 9 patches. Now we have 7 templates that are going to make 9-inch 4 patches. Wasn't that nice of me to make them 7 pieces each time? No more, no less. I mean, it was like, I had to work hard to come up with those blocks, but I did it for you. Phase 3, we decided to kind of shake things up a little bit. And this year we released fat quarter bundles in the beginning. And we showed you quilts in the beginning. The first year we didn't do that. But I mean, to be very honest, we came up with the idea at Fall Market, which is like in October, that we're going to release this thing in January. And she wants me to have all these blocks made into quilts. Well, with the holidays, hell, not happening. So things were just kind of evolved. And you helped us a lot with the way that the patterns were set up. A lot of changes evolved over that first year to make things clearer and make things more user-friendly for you, bottom line in that. So phase 3, which is the one that we are in right now, I went back to 9 patches and I chose 12 all new blocks that use the same 7 templates. So if you're a template person and if you bought phase 1 templates, they're working for these blocks. I have found, it's been my experience, that most people don't mind buying something if they're going to use it more than once. If it's something you're going to use one time and one time only, it's like, this is kind of an extravagance. I have to justify this. Is there no other way to do it? Well, of course there's another way to do it. But how is it that you prefer? And again, those of you doing it know that every month there's still those pattern pieces in there if you want to make your own. And there's still the template-free numbers if that's how you prefer to cut. I don't care how you cut. I just want you to cut. And then so, let's follow through here. Let's get those blocks made. By releasing the fat quarter tower, this made a lot of people very happy because they could see in advance exactly what fabrics they were going to have to work for the whole year. And as they're making block 1 and then 5 and then 7, they know, oh my gosh, I haven't used that red fabric since the first block. I better put some more of that in. And so the hope is obviously that at the end of the year, you're happier with the blocks than you might have been if you just got 3 little fabrics every month. Didn't matter how many times I would say, you don't have to use just those 3 fabrics. You can use some from the first month or the 3rd month, or you can use something from your stash. But still, when you have them all to begin with, we have found this to be a really good thing. And I hope that's what you're finding too, and I don't want to hear about it if it's not. So. All right, so now, when we kicked it off this year, we actually showed you some quilts made with this year's blocks. It'll be interesting to see if that was more of an incentive to you guys or whether it was overwhelming to you guys. But right now we're going to show you a lot of quilts again. If you've been following the building blocks or me or the newsletter that she sends out on a, I don't know what you call that, bi-weekly? Is that what it is? Well, but you sent one on Sunday too. Yes. So is that bi-weekly? Yeah. Twice a week. We know that's right. Okay. I've done patterns with her. I started with one half log cabin book I wanted to do with her, and then it evolved to a lot more books, all the Layer 'em Up series of books, and then finally into the patterns and the ruler. The ruler came, and then it's like the ruler's not going to sell itself. You've got to have patterns. So we have the Joy of Sets patterns. And we've just released number 7 in the series, and they were all based on, all except one, were based on either 6-inch, 9-inch, or 12-inch finished blocks. 9 inches obvious, isn't it? Why I would have included 9 inches in there. One of the patterns was only released in a 9-inch size. We did that because obviously we're doing the building blocks. We did that because Daniela has taken this to market, and there are shops all over the country doing the building blocks program, and all of them wanting ways that their customers can set these blocks afterwards. So they're becoming more and more interested in the 9-inch size as well. The one that was released only in the 9-inch size is the one that was kind of featured inside the Cutting Corners Ruler booklet. And it had the diagram, and it had some of the stuff, but it didn't have all the stuff. So yeah, now you got it all. If you want that much more information, that's where it is. If you've got the ruler, you don't necessarily need it, but if you want it. So we're going to show you a lot of quilts. Some you've probably seen before, some maybe you haven't seen before because they've been created since you saw a trunk show here. So what we've done is we've grouped the quilts by the pattern. And so I'm going to have the girls bring up what? What? No, that's last. She wanted me to show you that one first, but that's last. So you've got to stick around to the end. So the first pattern that we're going to see with blocks is called Twin Peaks. This is what the presentation of these patterns looks like. It's a larger format than the smaller ones, and everything is a full page. So you get a full page of cutting instructions for each of the sizes. You don't have to kind of cram everything into the small format patterns and hope to be able to figure things out here. All of the patterns are set up so that if you don't want to make blocks but you like a pattern, you can just cut a focus fabric. And that's what you see right here. This is a focus fabric. That's what it's referred to on the patterns. And so you can cut that 6 inches or 6.5 raw edge to raw edge, just like your 6-inch finished blocks, and substitute that. Sometimes we've got a fabric that is just too wonderful. We don't want to cut it up. And we need something that's going to really feature that fabric or showcase it. I think these would be fun too, like speaking of grandchildren. What if you had your grandchildren every year on their birthday draw their hand and put their name on it and a date? Granted, you got to do it for them the first couple of years, and then as they get ready to graduate from high school or something, you made a quilt with those handprints in there. Or at some birthday party, every one of the kids at the party did their handprints, whether it was dipped in paint and onto a solid square, and incorporated those. And it'll work for any of the patterns, not just Twin Peaks. There's 2 of the patterns that have been, I shouldn't even tell you this, but have been more popular amongst people. One of them is Twin Peaks. We'll see if you can figure out what the other one is. They're all good patterns, but 2 of them are more popular. So this is Twin Peaks without any blocks. We are going to show you Twin Peaks with some blocks. Oh, I'm sorry. We got to show oscillating. We have to oscillate. So this was building blocks phase 1. Am I correct? Yes. Okay. Good. Now this has 18 blocks. Now, why do we use 18 blocks? When you put blocks on point, there are certain numbers that work really well. 8 blocks works really well. 18 blocks works really well. 13 blocks goes well on point, but it makes a square. So other than one of the patterns, I chose not to do that type of thing. I chose to go with the 18 blocks. So a lot of people during the year, and I experienced this a lot in the first year and the second year when we had monthly get-togethers and people would come in to work on their blocks and get help. They weren't just making 1 block. Those 3 fat 8s, you could get 2, 3, even 4 blocks out of those fat 8s of fabric if you wanted to. And so a lot of people would end up the year with not just the 12 blocks, 1 per month, but a lot more than that. And I would hear repeatedly, okay, I want to make a queen size quilt, but I've got the 12 blocks. How can I do that? And one of the things that you can do is that you can make your 9-inch blocks grow up to be 12 inches and then use all the yardages and everything for the 12-inch blocks, because now you've got a full queen size quilt. Now how do you make them grow up? You can either add more framing strips, or what I refer to as coping strips. It doesn't take a lot to make a 9-inch go to a 12-inch. 3 inches total, which is 1.5 on each of the 4 sides. That's not a lot. I frame the blocks beyond that because you can drop your arms. I know how hard that is. You can keep it up here, but there, that's better. It's just too hard. Oh, you are so good. They must have been working out at the gym. I could hardly even think about doing that, let alone do it for real. Okay, what was I going to say? Coping strips. I do coping strips because no matter how good a piecer you are, there will be some discrepancy in the finished size of these blocks. No matter how hard you try. And if you're really good, it's probably not much, maybe less than 1/4 of an inch. But let's say it's supposed to measure 12.5 raw edge to raw edge. You could be 1/4 inch bigger on one block and 1/4 inch smaller on the next block. Now you got a 1/2 inch difference. I don't want you throwing these blocks in the trash and say, I knew I didn't want to make a sampler quilt.
So, one of the easiest things you can do is sew a coping strip around each of those blocks and then square it up. Now they're all exactly the same size. Honestly, I have trouble today making a quilt without putting coping strips on, because in addition to reconciling size difference, it also adds just a little pop in there. There are 3 different presentations of these coping strips: negative, accent, and power. Negative means you hardly see them. If we had used exactly the same fabric in the background on all 12 blocks, and you still had that fabric, if you sewed that fabric as the coping strip, you wouldn't see it. It would disappear totally. Accent means it's there. This is an accent. It works with the colors that are already in the quilt. There was no attempt to change the colors of the original blocks. So it's just a little accent or kiss, if you will. And the power bars. I don't like the colors of those blocks. I don't want a red, white, and blue quilt. How can I make it different? When I do power bars, I generally speaking make them larger than the 1 inch that you see here. But it's something just to keep in mind as you have a set of blocks, whether it's the building blocks or something entirely different. Because these techniques don't just work for sample sets of blocks. They work for everything. Applique, embroidery. Some of you are doing the embroidery classes here. Think in terms of how can I set these things and do something different with them. Here's another Twin Peaks. This is very big because this is 12-inch blocks to begin with. So see what I said? If we had the 9-inch blocks and made them grow up to be 12-inch blocks, this is how big your quilt would be. This is 18 12-inch blocks. Some of you probably have 12-inch blocks, whether it's from a current project or something you started years ago when you first got into quilting. Wouldn't it be fun to get them together? I'm working on a set of blocks right now at home on my wall that I have not touched for over 15 years. I didn't even remember I had them. I'm embarrassed to say that because I am a project person. I do get things done. But it was blocks I made as I was teaching on the road. Every time I left home, I made another one of those blocks. And so, they just went in the box because, I was in the process of making them. I haven't taught that class in 15 years. So I haven't looked at those blocks in over 15 years. I'm ignoring, because there's what was I thinking? You ever done one of those, like, what was I thinking? Because there's brown blocks, and there's blue and gray blocks, and there's purple and white blocks, and there's orange and purple and blue. Oh my gosh, but we're going to have a blue quilt when we're done with this thing, and it's going to be gorgeous, because the quilt becomes the colors you set the blocks together with. Whether you choose to work with the same colors, which you see here and you've seen on the quilts today, or whether you choose to ignore that is totally up to you. Big quilt. This one also has an alternating secondary block, so if you don't want to make 6 more of your piece blocks, you can substitute something else in that spot that is simpler to piece. We'll also calm it down a little bit. When you have 18 piece blocks that are each one different, it does have a tendency to be a little bit busier than if there was a place to rest your eyes, which those 6 blocks kind of marshal down the middle that way do. They allow your eyes a place to rest. Okay? This is the Christmas one we released a year ago in July, when we did Christmas in July, so this was using phase 2. So again, they're 9-inch blocks. I didn't think I touched it. I don't think there is a right side. It's not upside down, is it? Okay, good. Yeah, I didn't think so. One of the things I love doing, and it is already done for you, the math and everything with the patterns, but I love these setting triangles. I really hate just taking a big hunk of fabric and cutting it into those great big gargantuan triangles. Now, if you're a hand quilter and absolutely love the hand quilting part of the quilt making, then you probably don't like all this piecework in here. It doesn't give you a nice place to put your quilting. Or a machine quilter. It doesn't even have to be a hand quilter. But by breaking up those spaces, it makes it much more interesting. And it adds interest to the quilt that is incredibly simple to do with the cutting corner ruler, obviously. So this is another thing I use the ruler for, is to make those strip piece setting triangles. And in the ruler packaging, it tells you exactly how to do it. If you've got a size that I've not come up with for you, there's charts that you don't have to do a single stitch of math. You just have to look at the chart. I mean, how much easier can I make it for you guys? Sort of coming home and cutting and sewing for you. Not doing it. Okay. This is another one of the Twin Peaks done where you have a focus fabric. So there's no blocks in here. And this is done with the 6-inch squares. So it's the same number of pieces as the last quilt that was done with 12, well, the quilt 2 before that was done with 12-inch blocks. But you can see how they can grow just based on the size squares that you start with. So you may have 6-inch applique blocks. You may have 6-inch embroidered blocks. You may have, just solid pieces of fabric because you want to quilt in them. That would be a reason for doing this type of thing. When I make these triangles and I use the same fabric in the last strip of the setting triangle that I use in the border, doesn't that look hard to do? Yeah. I promise you, I do nothing that's technically hard to do. I don't. I make things that look technically hard to do, but they're not. There's not a soul in here that can cut their own fabric and operate their own sewing machine that couldn't do this. Not a soul. Now, if you can't use your machine, okay, you're off the hook. All right, so we're leaving Twin Peaks and we're going to Market Square. And Market Square, I hope I'm remembering right here, was the very, very first of the Joy of Sets patterns, wasn't it? Isn't that right?
Yes.
Good, thank you. And when we first released it, we had 2 identical quilts. I think they're both here today. Done one with sampler blocks. These are 12-inch blocks. So again, it's really large. And then the next one you'll see in a few minutes is done with just the solid squares like the pattern cover is done. So there's no piecework in it. It just shows you the space that's left. And the yardages are given there if you do want to do that sort of thing. Now this is another one that is like, oh my gosh, where do you start? This looks so hard to do. But let's go in on one block. Here's one block. Here's block 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's only 12 of your original blocks in there. We have 6, again, just like the previous quilt that you saw, of a much simpler block, or you could have 18 of your sampler blocks if you wanted to. Then we have an alternating square right here. Over and over and over again. And the way that was made, you cut a black square, slice twice, corner to corner. Now you have 4 triangles. You take the ruler and you cut off that corner. Do the same thing with your white square. Square, slice twice, cut off the corner. Now you're going to piece this unit. And the pattern tells you exactly what to do and how big and everything. And you sew those back on. You've cut this funny shape, which I refer to frequently as an etc. I know some of you mathy people are just, it's a whatever it is. Is it a trapezoid or a decapitated triangle?
Yes, I think that is the official name.
Decapitated triangle. Does it matter what it's called? I just gave you a super easy way to make those things. You don't have to make a template for this guy. You just have to follow my instructions. I know you don't want to, but if you want to get this look, it makes it simple for you to do. But again, do you see what I said earlier? You see the whole quilt first. Then you start saying, oh, look, there's piece blocks in there. And then you say, oh my gosh, each one's different. They're not all the same. Eventually you say, oh, look, these are the same. There's 6 in there that are the same, but they're not the same as the rest of them. And that's because I didn't have 18 blocks. I had 12 blocks to set. These were first released as part of the Marty Michelle's Patchwork Party.
Right.
This was the set that Danielle and Cozy Quilts had to do, and we decided to use the pattern because, 2 for 1 here. Come on, folks. Got a pattern for the cover as well as, something to do with them that's more than just sashing and cornerstones. So the second one, identical except for the piece blocks. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. Except for the pieced sampler blocks. Everything else is identical. Just takes out having to make 12 blocks. Got to make all the rest, but yeah. But see, you don't have to have all those piece blocks. Some of you may not be piecers, but you want to make quilts. This, sure gonna be faster to do one like this than it is to make all those blocks first and then start something like this. So just something to think about. This one does not have the luxury of coping strips. What if your blocks aren't the same size, but you want to do this? Well, what if you put coping strips on them? You got 9-inch blocks and you want a big quilt, you could put those coping strips and make them grow up to be the 12-inch blocks. And then use the 12-inch sizes. There is no problem you're going to throw at me that I don't have an answer for. Whether you like my answers or not, that's up to you. Okay. Now we're going to see, this is one of the newer ones, Stars Above. We released this last fall, was it? Or last spring?
Sure.
Something like that. It's one of the more recent ones. Daniela asked me for a smaller quilt because mine do tend to get big, even though we're only working with 9-inch blocks. So by keeping them one set straight and two no alternating blocks, so not on point and no alternating blocks, this is going to be 12 of your 9-inch blocks. You can have a decent sized lap quilt or a wall quilt depending on what you want to do. This is an example again with focus fabric. So we put these stars in the intersections. And I wanted you to look at this and think, oh, she did all that set-in piecing. But there is no set-in piecing. It's colored so that it looks like the traditional Lemoyne star. But in reality, you make a pinwheel for the cornerstones. And then we see this shape over and over again in my patterns. So it was cut as a rectangle, cut off the corners, and reattach triangles. You just have to be careful that colors will match up in the proper way. So you have a green, what appears to be diamond, alternating with a red one. That's why it looks like it has the traditional diamond shape with set-in piecing, not how it's made. So it's really much easier to make and much faster. This one also shows focus fabric. This is one of those where you saw the fabric first and you loved the fabric, but you know what, as well as I do, if you cut it up into small pieces to piece with it, you have lost that incredible fabric. So I literally started this quilt with this focus fabric. The border is the very same as what you've got inside here. I chose not to fussy cut those squares for the middle. Some of you would have fussy cut those squares for the middle, and that would have been every bit, if not more beautiful to some of you. But I wanted to show it didn't matter, that you didn't have to, waste fabric and Swiss cheese it in order to have a quilt from that fabric. Your eye tends to fill in the gaps. This one, here's your same little construction thing, made a pinwheel, and then the rectangle with the corners on to create the Lemoyne star illusion. Now sometimes in pulling the fabrics to do this, the problem that I will run into is finding two fabrics that contrast enough that you're going to see those stars. Sometimes you've got a set of blocks, like I had a set of blue blocks, and I only wanted a red, white, and blue quilt. I did not want another color in there. So I chose to not piece the center, but to make it a solid square with solid red triangles for all of the points. So it follows the same concept, but just reduces the amount of piecing, if you will. And because this was the illusion that I was going for. I wasn't going for the Lemoyne stars. Another set of colors where I had another color I wanted to use. I really wanted gold in there, for example. Gold would have worked with either red and gold or blue and gold. That isn't what I wanted that day. And I hear this sometimes, oh, I like that pattern, but I don't have another color I want to use. Well, one of the things that I think is unique in my patterns, now since I don't buy other patterns, I can't honestly say whether nobody else does this, but there's a page towards the back of it that's called Sharyn's Classroom. And under the Sharyn's Classroom, there's a what if section. Because I'll say to you, what if you don't make them as Lemoyne stars, but you colored them all the same? I'll say, what if you put these blocks on point instead of setting them straight? What if instead of all one red fabric, you did them very scrappy? What would it look like if I had one red star, one green, one blue, one purple, one orange, one yellow? I don't know because I don't have a sample, but I will plant a seed. And that's something I hope that those of you that have bought any of the patterns or worked with them that have read that part. That's my favorite part. Are we still on Stars Above?
Yes.
Oh, we are. And this is last year's Phase 2's blocks, is that correct? Yes. This is the one that Maureen made using the Stars Above pattern. So she had just the I missed that. Was it really good?
Yes.
Oh, who Maureen was. Yes, she had the dark neutrals last year. Am I right, Maureen? Okay, good. Sometimes I'm talking away and I'm thinking, is my brain in sync with my mouth or not? So she had just dark neutrals. There is no blue in her blocks. They are just the dark neutrals, which was the browns, the blacks, the tan types of tones. She put some light in there. That wasn't part of the original packets. Remember, you're always in a position you can do that. She chose to add the blue because, you know, what other color do you like with the browns and the blacks? That's your decision. Don't ever think it because my blocks are all browns and blacks that I have to make a quilt that's only browns and blacks. You look at this now, and it's hard to believe there's no blue in those blocks. She put the blue coping strips on, a blue accent border, and blue is her second color with her stars. So there's not that much blue, and yet blue really comes off the surface of that quilt. And if asked later, what color was that quilt, you would say blue and brown. It's not just a hidden thing. Sometimes I want them to be hidden. This is not hidden. This is obvious. This is this the newest pattern? Yes. Friendship Corner. This is one of phase 3's colorways, which was all solids. And using very scrappy, which is not the way the yardages are set up here. It is one of the what ifs, and there is a disclaimer that says that. So what if, instead of the coping strip always being the one same fabric like you just saw in Maureen's, what if instead of the stars all being one fabric, which you'll see in the next quilt in a minute, what if you made them scrappy? Now you're going to say, well, it works here because you've got all those different colors. It works in anything you do. You just have to be willing to try. We also took from the back quarter tower, other than the black fabric, which was, bought extra, everything in color that you see on this quilt came from that one fat quarter tower, including the pieced segments to make the accent border in there. So if you were working with any of the colorways, what you've got in your fat quarter tower is enough to do this illusion with your colors. Okay? 18 fat quarters. The tower that was sold here. Weren't they all 18, every colorway? This was actually the first one that I made with this pattern. And this is controlled as opposed to scrappy. So one fabric made the coping strip, a second fabric made the stars, and a third fabric did the sashing and the negative visibility first border, the invisible border. You don't see it as a border, but it allows you to finish out those friendship star blocks. These blocks were all blue and white. If you had asked me the 1st of January last year what color quilt I was going to make with this, I would have told you a patriotic one. I would have told you I was making a red, white, and blue one. What happened between January of 2012 and January of 2013 when I got the blocks made is that I'd made several red, white, and blue quilts. Don't want to do that again. So I took those blue and white blocks, one of the colorways from last year, and turned it into more of an aqua teal and yellow. But there's none of that aqua teal in the blocks, there's none of that yellow in the blocks. I did choose a greenish fabric for here with some blue in it. You got to be pretty close to see that. I'll bet in the back of the room you can't see the blue missing. Well, your eyes are better than mine, ladies. And the same thing with the aqua that I chose for here. There's a little undercurrent of blue running through it. So when I say you can choose any color, I do want it to work with my blocks, so I will look for, even if I want teal, I'll look for one that kind of is a permission fabric that way to pull them together. Okay. Oh, and another one. This is another friendship star. This one is done with focus blocks. Focus fabric, sorry, not focus blocks. This one's not heavy, yes. So this one started with that wonderful pansy fabric. that one of these days you'll get to see. Then with the black coping strips and with the green, it's her stars. They really pop, don't they? And this fabric is a companion, the sashing fabric, to the big focus fabric, just a much smaller scale. But if it weren't for that limey green and those stars, this would be just kind of a wash of fabric. Try to imagine it without that green in there. A lot of times that happens, doesn't it? That we make these blocks and then we put them on the wall or spread them out on the floor and it's like, oh, where did they go? Just remember, you have another chance to pull it all together, to make it pop. Okay, and now we're going to see mosaic tile. Another one of the patterns that I think looks hard, not hard to sew. This is your black and white blocks from this year. And it was decided to put that bright blue in each of the blocks. So the back border tower, the 18 back quarters of black and white fabrics from this year, plus the blue fabric. Got the blocks made. What are we going to put coping strips on? This was the pattern that was chosen to do. We need to pick a coping strip fabric. No, we can do black. We certainly could have done the blue or a variation of the blue. It was decided to go with that yellow. It was decided to push the colors on this. Could we have done a soft quilt with these? Absolutely. In fact, to be honest with you, I'd chosen pastels. A soft yellow and a soft lavender and a soft green first. It was gorgeous. And then it was decided, no, let's push the colors. Let's push those values out just a little bit. And it is going to make it more dramatic and more striking. One of the things that I like to do when I've got the fabrics and I'm ready to set the blocks is I stand back and I'm looking at it and I assign an adjective to what I see. All we got now is just a bunch of fabric spread out on a table. Hear it cozy before we buy them. And when I put the pastel ones out with it, it felt soft, feminine, sweet. Those were the adjectives that I was seeing when I just looked at the fabric. When we switched to the brighter colors, now we have the graphic, the strong, the bright, the bold. And it was just when you say those words out loud, your ears will head to your brain and you'll know which one you want. Which of those adjectives did you like? If I was making it for my 8-year-old granddaughter, I'd have gone soft. Making it for my almost 14-year-old granddaughter, this better be the palette I'd choose. Do you see how that can enter into your decisions as well? This is another mosaic tile. This is the one from the cover. This was the pastel blocks from phase. That's which one? Is it 2? Well, let me see if I can see a block. I can tell whether it's. These are 9 patches, so it's phase 1. Yeah. And one of our colorways was pastel that year, and you didn't know background was available or was provided for you. So I actually made 2 sets of blocks that year. One with black as the background with the pastels, and one is white as the background with the same pastels. And this is the one where I made the blocks black backgrounds. Because I wanted to show, as a lot of people, think pastel and just like, but I wanted to show that pastel doesn't have to be wussy. It can have that punch. Black is always a good choice if that's what the direction you're heading. If you don't like black, there's some aversion or allergic reaction you have to it. Any other strong dark like that, like a strong blue, a strong dark green, is going to give you a very similar effect to that. So these blocks on point, coping strips, then triangles. Again, remember, do you recognize this? We did this one time before, didn't we, in Market Square? But now instead of those pieces coming together, they go out. They go towards your corners. This is that same shape. I told you, you'll see those in my blocks a lot. Rectangle, cut off the corners, so triangles back on. That's where the pink star comes from. And then here again, I chose to finish out this shape around here. Softer in the middle here, a little stronger out here because of the black border. You might have chosen to float it instead and put all the white fabric around the outside. And it would have made it an overall lighter quilt, but it would have made it a little bit maybe more cohesive in those types of areas. The next ones you're going to see are garden stars. At this point, I can't remember what any pattern's called, so I'm glad we have these to look at. Garden stars is the one I told you earlier, there's a quilt on the cover of the Cutting Corners ruler packet, and this is the setting there. It talks about it inside with the ruler as well. So we just took it to the next stage, the next step, and added more information. So this was last year's blocks. That the colorway was Batiks Plus. So the blocks not only have batiks in them, they have other fabrics. One of my favorite combinations to work with today is batiks and Civil War together in the same block. That isn't what you're looking at here. Oh yeah, really. Oh my gosh, if you've never done that, try it. It is so incredibly exciting. Yeah, it really is. You know, one of the things, if you only use batiks, they tend to look very kind of like a meatloaf. You take all those separate ingredients and grind them all up, and you can't tell where any one thing is. Whereas if you have them separated by something else, I by the way, before I move on, I tend to think the same thing if you only have reproduction Civil War fabric. They too tend to look like a meatloaf that you can't tell one thing from the next. So if it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that combined together, they complement each other beautifully. And you can make quilts that feel very contemporary. You can make quilts that feel very antique-y. I had one gal, I had a little group I gave that challenge to, that did it all in light neutrals, the entire quilt. Batiks and Civil War. So like a lot of the shirting fabrics, drop dead gorgeous. So consider that. So what is the garden star? You take your blocks, put a coping strip on, put them on point, separate with a simple sashing, and here again is that same sashing we've seen before to create those stars. And again, that trademark strip triangle for the setting triangles out there that just kind of adds a little to it, doesn't it? This one is,
Garden Stars.
this is another Garden Stars? Okay, this is the first one I made. This is the one that's on the cover of the pattern. You know, they never look as good on patterns as they do in person, do they? So this is 18 blocks on point. This is your 9-inch blocks. So that's back to what I said earlier in terms of making a large quilt. Once you put them on point, they're growing. Once you put coping strips on, they grow. So my 9-inch blocks grew up to be 11 inches, finished sizes I'm talking here, before I even put the sashing in. So if you keep that in mind, you know, you too may think in terms of maybe I don't want to do 12-inch or 15-inch blocks. Maybe I do want to think in terms of smaller. Here again is that strip triangle, just like we saw before there. I love the way when you do that, that your sashing just kind of penetrates out. You know, it just kind of like floats on the surface, and it looks really hard. I find myself looking for fabrics like this that hide seam allowances. You can't see that that's pieced in there. I avoid directional prints, stripes, regular geometrics. If you wanted to hide a seam, don't go for those. You will drive yourself crazy, and if you try to get me involved, you're driving me crazy trying to get those pieces to match up. It's just not going to happen. So that's the garden star. Next, we're going to see trellis. Okay, this is the only pattern given in 4 sizes. 2 shapes, 6 sizes. So for 6-inch, 9-inch, and 12-inch blocks, for 13 blocks or 17 blocks. I already told you that 18 blocks goes on point nice. 12 inches can go on point nice. 13 can make a square quilt. But, oh, this is 12 blocks. 12 and 17 are the 2 numbers that you've got. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here. So what I said a second ago, just hit the delete button. It wasn't true. I was trying to see if you were listening and I caught myself. What happens is that you have 2 blocks in a corner instead of 1. And that's why you don't have the normal number of blocks that you're setting. So when you have 2 blocks on a corner, that really can make for a great big humongous corner triangle. So instead of letting that happen, I chose to carry the sashing on out and split that into 2 more triangles. So normally with your side and corner triangles, you have the 2 different ones. You always have 4 corners, but the number of sides depends on how many blocks you're setting. But here, they're all exactly the same. So there's, in this setting, there's 3 per side. So 3 times 4, 12 total. This is another thing I like doing. I like doing the stripped ones where I, split that and add a little spacer strip in there. I love doing this, where I take this piece and I split it up so that I have a little square here, and it can be a plain square, it can be a piece square. And oftentimes I will take some image that I've seen on the surface of the quilt, and that's what I choose to use here. In this case, I use the pinwheel. This has 2 coping strips on it. One is your brown, 2 is the same blue as these triangles. That's the only way to easily make these be the right sizes. Could you oversize these triangles? Yeah, but you're going to really have to oversize them, and then you're going to have to fuss to make them fit. This is perfect. Why would you want to fuss to make something fit when you can make them perfect? So again, look for those fabrics that hide those seam allowances. The original pattern shows either plain squares of fabric, more focused fabric in that position, or it showed, in this case, on this quilt, it showed the shoe fly blocks. Here you're going to see the pinwheel blocks. You can do anything in there. You don't have to be limited by stuff like that. Here's the, this is the cover quilt, one of the 2 cover quilts there.
Did you tell them that was this year's blocks and this year's fabrics, the one you just held up?
I didn't tell you that. This is the Robin's Egg Blue and Brown, phase 3. Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you.
The quilt that you just saw, the blue and brown one there. Okay, and this was last year's, no, this was phase 1. This was phase 1 because there are 9 patches again. If I don't remember which colorway we did which year, all I have to do is look at the blocks. If they're 9 patches, it means it was either phase 1 or 3. But it's been, I know the quilt's been done too long for it to be phase 3. So these were phase 1 patterns. This was the shoe fly, and just that little coping strip here and here. Just that little accent, just that little bit of something there, just to kind of spark it up. Hide your size differences. It often, with a set of sampler blocks, can make it easier to choose a sashing fabric too. Because if you've got some blocks with dark backgrounds and some blocks with light backgrounds, what color sashing is going to show? So by putting and equalizing the same, whether it's the same fabric exactly or just the same value, oftentimes will take that problem away for you. Okay? This is the same quilt.
Well, it's different because this is 18 fat quarters and this one is totally scrappy.
This is totally
First one-
scrappy. This
No,
isn't from
18.
18 fat quarters.
This one's 18 fat quarters. The one we just showed was totally scrappy. It was from your stash.
No, that's not from my stash.
Then it was from the. Yeah, it is.
That's the bitter text fabric. It's
No,
not
this
from my
is the back
stash.
fabric.
So is that.
That's 18. That's 18 fat quarters. This is scrappy.
Listen to her.
This is 18.
Whatever she said.
18 fat quarters. So we mimicked a scrappy quilt using just 18 fat quarters.
Could you stand more in the middle of the aisle?
Slowly you can move
Keep going
to
south.
the, or east or west.
Good, good.
Here.
Oh, she's right, by the way. I'm seeing now.
Wait, what? What? What?
Do I have to do this again?
Scoot right. We'll hold these up side by side so they can see them. I'll hold
You want me to come up? Here, I'll take this one. Kathy, you move down. Mo, you move. Yeah, you there? So you can see the 2 side by side. You can't hardly tell the difference, can you?
No.
No, good. Because I think all the setting fabrics were the same on the 2,
Right.
weren't they?
Yes.
Yeah, at the time we actually sold the bundles for this one, didn't we?
Right.
Yeah, okay. So it just shows you can work out of your stash, or you can buy all new fabric. It's just simple as that. It's hard to do this. It is really hard to keep your hands up in the air. You get up, she gets a hot dog after this. This is another trellis. This is from Building Blocks 1, Phase 1. Yeah, oh, that's right. That's what's different here. Thank you. I thought, why are we showing this one? And this worked out really well with a lot of the gals that came to the settings workshops in the follow-up to phase 1, because some of them hadn't finished all their blocks, but they were now ready to start phase 2. So what are they going to do? They don't want to leave phase 1 until they're done with it, but they want to start phase 2. This is another number that goes nicely into trellis, which is 7 blocks on point. There's not a lot you can do with 7 blocks. I can't tell you how many times I've had 7 blocks. People give me a lot of orphan blocks. This is not a request and it's not an invitation. But I do get them a lot. And this was one setting I came up with years ago, a way that I could use 7 blocks. So again, you're gonna see there's 2 blocks across an end, and 2, and 2, and 2. And just then 1 in the middle that way. That's how you use the 7 blocks. So you don't have to be limited to the numbers and sizes that you see on the patterns. Obviously, that's the only ones that give you all the yardages and sizes, but this is another opportunity for you. This is trellis with 12-inch blocks. I'd like you to see the difference in the sizes that these can create. So with 12-inch sampler blocks, this thing really started to grow, didn't it? Got your coping strips around the blocks, and now because you've got piece blocks for the main blocks, but that doesn't mean you have to make piece blocks in those little setting triangles. You can still use just a focus fabric, just a pretty fabric that kind of pulls all the rest of them together. This was last year's Marty Michelle Patchwork Party, 2012, hence the 12-inch blocks. Just in case you think I sit up night piecing 12-inch blocks so I can have these samples. And here's the same quilt done with just focus fabric all the way through. So anybody want to guess what the second most favorite pattern is? We already saw Twin Peaks. What do you think it is? Trellis. It must look easier to a lot of people. It really is not a lot easier than any of the others. It might have a little bit less piecing, but you know, in the overall scheme of a quilt, if you can, you know, think, okay, if you're going to do market square, it's going to add 6 hours to the whole equation. That's not a lot of time in the overall scheme of a whole quilt. I know, to some people 6 hours is a long time. So you're the only one that can make those decisions. So trellis, done with just focus fabric. This is another trellis done with just focus fabric. So we saw 12-inch, now we're going to see 6 inches. And this is another one of those, I found this fabric first and wanted to do something with it. And so often those just end up on the back of the quilt, which it did, because I really like that fabric.
It's so much prettier on the front.
Well, everybody gets to see it on the front. Not everybody gets to see it on the back. But you know, when you have one like that, it is nice to know there's a solution. Something that we can do that's, you know, going to look like you've done some effort, not just sewing a bunch of big squares together or simple sashing with a cornerstone, which there's nothing wrong if you're making a comfort quilt or you're donating it to shelter or something like that, but it's for yourself, you know, it's kind of fun. Okay, is there more over there?
No,
Just this one?
my table's out, but hold up the cutting corner ruler because you talked about it, so let's show them what
The
it
ruler?
Yeah.
This is the packaging. And inside here is a booklet with, how many pages? Tells you, here's a 16-page booklet included that has a lot of information. You know, I just bought a ruler somebody else had talked about. I don't remember now what it did or something. There was no instructions, and yet there was a quilt on the, you know, the packaging, but no instructions how to use it at all. So I promise you, if you get this ruler, you may choose not to read those instructions. But you're better off to read them if you want to use it. And you can't come back to me later and say, well, I don't know how to use this, because there is good instructions here. There's charts. So if you want to do the strip triangle settings, they give you lots of different sizes for both the side ones and the corner ones. There are 2 different sets. We don't have an open one handy, do we?
I'm sure we do. Connie, can you help find an open cutting corners ruler?
There's 2 different sets of lines. The reason for that is one is in 1/4-inch increments and the other side is in 1/2-inch increments. When I first drafted out the ruler, I put them all together and my eyes were like literally crossing over. You know, because I was so afraid I was going to choose the wrong line because they look so similar, even if we made some solid and some dash, which we did. So by having them on 2 ends of the ruler, just have to make sure you start on the right side. And oftentimes I take that, who makes an OmniGrid, that glow tape stuff, and I'll put a piece of that right by the size that I'm using, because it peels off, leaves no residue on your, I have rulers. Oh, you could have come up here. If I put it in front of me, you can see what I'm talking about, but I wore white today. So 1 set of lines, and they do have both solid and dash, so that you know, can tell them apart a little easier. But like this side is all in 1/4-inch increments, and the smallest size is 3/4 of an inch. Haven't found anybody using that size yet. But. And then the other side is in 1/2 increments, the smallest one being 1/2 inch. So those of you that do miniatures, you may just find this is very convenient to have. Now, the reason that I made you wait to see this last quilt, and the reason it is last, is I don't want anybody to think that you have to use one of my patterns to set these blocks together. I want you to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that you've got my permission, my blessings, my encouragement, whatever it is, to try something different. Now this is a set of last year's light neutral blocks that I wanted to just set. And I said to Daniela, do I have to use one of my patterns? Now, I love my patterns. Should this be a punishment to use one of them? But do you know well, you get an idea how many of these things I've done, right? I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something different. So I had seen a quick quilt that somebody else had made with a focus fabric, not a piece block. And typical Sharyn, I looked at this and I thought, what if instead of a focus fabric, I put in a piece block? Because the piece blocks, or in that case, the focus fabric, was framed just like this. And that alternated with a stripped rectangle. Just so happens to be 2.5 inch strips that work there. Did you see Danielle walk around and take a better look as soon as I said that? Did you see that? So it does have 13 of the piece blocks. When I made the light neutrals last year, I did have a couple extra that I was able to pull the 13 I wanted to use. So it's all up on the wall, and I deliberately put the same fabric in this position on every one. I put the same fabric, not as this, but in this position on every single one. Now, granted, I'm using only light neutrals here, but I wanted it to appear that this block was framed with all the same fabric, just like this one was framed with all the same fabric. Being the light neutrals, it wasn't as obvious, and all of a sudden I'm thinking it's a little bit too predictable. So I said, what if I cut off those corners? So I took the ruler and I cut off those corners and just reattach, and this is the same batik fabric throughout. I could have done those scrappy. I wanted you to see them, which is one reason I chose to work with all the same fabric, but I didn't want it to yell at you. If I had chosen something as dark, for example, as this dark brown here, you'd have had to stand back because it would have been so strong. That it was not the illusion that I was going for. So not one of my patterns, but you know, it's a fun quilt. And I hope that it plants a seed for you and that it makes you once again aware. I mean, you can hear the words over and over again, and one time it makes a difference. It says something to you at a different place than what you're at. Haven't you found that sometimes you go to a quilt show, and you can put this down now, and you're trying to pick colors for your next quilt. So that's what you find yourself looking at the quilt show, is the colors that people have made their quilts at. The next time you're looking for a border for something, and you're drawn to the borders on the quilts. So depending upon where you're at today, maybe you're still piecing those blocks, and maybe if that's the case, seeing that there are finished quilts at the end of this rainbow keeps you encouraged to keep coming in once a month to get that next pattern so that you can make that next block. Or if you haven't finished phase 1 blocks or phase 2 blocks, they will all go together. Size-wise, they're all 9-inch blocks. Phase 1 and 3 are all 9 patches. But even if you were using some of your 4 patches and some of your 9 patches, because of the types of blocks I chose, they will look good together. You know, there may be some of the blocks that you're going to like better than other ones. That's a given. That just goes with the territory. There's some I made all 3 years, not both years, but all 3 years I like better than others. Some I thought, what was I thinking when I designed it, but the handout's done, we're stuck with it. We're going ahead. Doesn't mean if you see one that you don't like, you have to do it. I had to do it. You don't have to do it. You can make 2 of block 4 if you want to. I just want you to enjoy the process. I want you to enjoy playing with fabric. I want you to enjoy cutting it up, sewing it back together, and ultimately knowing that you can put a quilt together. Do I have any questions? Brain dead? If you were here since early this morning. I think I'm done unless you told me I was supposed to do something else.
No, that's happening.
Oh, okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. Anybody want to say?